Imagine a lab, white walls, rows of glassware catching the sterile glow of overhead lights. In the corner, a computer hums, calculations flickering across its screen. A breakthrough is close, not in theory, in reality, in blood samples, in data, in a discovery that might save lives. Now imagine that scientist disappears, not literally, but from the grants, from the conferences, from the citations. Their research vanishes from the public records, their name no longer shows up in government databases. Their field, suddenly deemed too complicated, too controversial, is quietly removed from the agenda. No warning, no headlines, just silence. Between 2016 and 2020, something happened in America's scientific community, something most people missed. Behind executive orders, budget lines, and policy memos, a quiet shift, categories erased, questions withdrawn, funding redirected, careers rerouted. At first glance, it looked like politics, culture war maybe, another flashpoint in an already divided nation. But to those inside the system, to LGBTQ scientists working under microscopes, behind server racks, inside clean rooms, it was something else. It was a message that who they were didn't belong in the future of science. This story isn't about slogans or social media outrage, it's about hard numbers, about what happens when an entire group of people is removed from the data. Not because their work wasn't valid, but because their existence was inconvenient. And here's the thing, once they were gone, the science changed. Did one administration set back the future of American discovery? Did we lose not just researchers, but the research itself? And if we did, what did it cost us? Because now, years later, the numbers have surfaced, and they paint a picture no one expected. This is the story of what happens when science forgets who it's supposed to serve. Her name was Dr. Alex Chang, a molecular biologist, first-generation college student, tenured by 34. She was studying rare immune responses in cancer patients, the kind of work that doesn't make headlines until it saves a life. Her lab was modest, a converted wing in a mid-tier university, lined with centrifuges, old grants tacked to corkboards, and one dog-eared photo of her postdoc team laughing in lab coats. In 2016, she submitted a grant renewal to the National Institutes of Health, a follow-up on work already funded, already published, already peer-reviewed. It was denied. At first, she didn't question it. Rejection is part of the process. But when her colleagues working in similar fields received their renewals, while hers was inexplicably categorized as non-essential, she started digging. And what she found wasn't just a personal setback, it was a pattern. Across departments, across disciplines, across the country, LGBTQ+ researchers, or those focused on LGBTQ health disparities, began quietly losing funding, access, and visibility. Not all at once, not through formal announcements, but through the slow tightening of what counted as worthy science. Some universities began cautioning grant writers to frame proposals apolitically. Review committees started redlining research that mentioned gender identity. And in one striking case, a federally funded database removed entire fields tracking sexual orientation in clinical data, fields that had existed for nearly a decade. The rationale was always administrative, streamlining, budget efficiency. But to the scientists watching their work disappear, it felt like something else entirely: erasure. For Dr. Chang, the final blow came in 2018. She discovered that her research profile, which once listed a dozen LGBTQ+ mentorship awards and DEI collaborations, had been rewritten on her department's public page, sanitized, stripped of anything that could be seen as divisive. When she asked why, she was told, "It's just better optics these days." She left academia 6 months later. Her story isn't unique, and it isn't the worst, but it's a window into what happens when a government, even without passing laws, even without saying the quiet part out loud, decides who belongs in the data and who doesn't. Because science is built on numbers, but numbers don't collect themselves. Someone decides what to count. And in those 4 years, what wasn't counted stopped existing. We don't know how many LGBTQ scientists were passed over for leadership roles, or how many grad students changed research topics to stay funded, or how many discoveries were delayed, redirected, or buried entirely. We only know what's missing, because people like Dr. Chang were watching it disappear in real time. It started with a form, a simple line on a routine survey. Do you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? For years that line appeared in dozens of federal health surveys, questions used by the Department of Health and Human Services to track disparities in mental health, chronic disease, substance use, and more. The data wasn't perfect, but it was growing, building a picture of who was being underserved and how to fix it. Then, in early 2017, the line was gone. No press release, no debate, just a quiet revision in an Excel column. The National Survey of Older Americans Act participants, used to allocate resources for aging LGBTQ populations, removed every question related to sexual orientation. The annual Survey of Health Centers, which monitors public health outcomes, followed suit. One by one, data fields vanished. The explanation? Burden reduction. Too many questions, not enough time. But those working inside the system told a different story. This wasn't about efficiency, it was about invisibility. Because without those questions, disparities couldn't be documented. And without documentation, there was nothing to fund. When CDC researchers tried to access historical data for LGBTQ-specific illness rates in 2018, data that had been publicly available for years, entire tables returned null queries. Columns now read, "Field no longer tracked." This wasn't just a change in format, it was a break in continuity. An institutional memory loss, like deleting chapters from a medical textbook and pretending they were never written. The funding impact was immediate. According to NIH data, LGBTQ-focused research proposals saw a steep decline in both approval rates and dollar allocation between 2017 and 2020. Researchers quietly revised their proposals, avoiding loaded terms like gender identity or minority stress. Some removed references to LGBTQ populations altogether, replacing them with vague phrases like underserved communities. Others simply stopped applying. By 2019, multiple LGBTQ health organizations reported losing access to the very data they use to advocate for care. Clinics serving queer populations struggled to secure grants, because they could no longer prove the need. And the most chilling part? No one noticed. Not right away. There were no headlines about vanishing survey questions, no viral outrage about null queries. For most Americans, the science continued, unbothered, uninterrupted. But for a small group of researchers watching their subjects disappear from spreadsheets and abstracts, the silence was deafening. Because in a system built on statistics, you don't have to ban something to erase it, you just have to stop measuring it. And once it's gone from the data, it's gone from the decisions. There were no official memos, no hard bans, no stated policies that LGBTQ science was unwelcome. But something was changing. Across universities, researchers began avoiding certain terms in their grant applications. Gender identity, queer youth, even health equity became flagged phrases. Peer reviewers, some supportive, others afraid, started warning colleagues off topics that might raise red flags in funding committees. Behind closed doors, junior scientists were given quiet advice. Don't mention your pronouns on your CV. Take out the identity language. Keep it clinical. You can do that work after tenure. Many didn't wait. They changed research focus entirely. Others, like Dr. Kevin Ellis, stayed, but at a cost. A biomedical engineer working on hormone therapy access tech, Dr. Ellis had built a research track focused on trans health. But between 2017 and 2020, every major grant application he submitted was either delayed, denied, or redirected. Even as comparable cis-focused projects were greenlit without issue. In a letter to the LGBTQ+ STEM Alliance in 2021, he wrote, "They never told me to stop, they just stopped replying, and it wasn't just government agencies. The chilling effect seeped into tech companies as well. In the wake of shifting federal norms, major Silicon Valley players quietly scaled back funding for diversity-centered R&D. Projects that had once explored bias in algorithms, inclusive wearable tech, and LGBTQ health tracking. Internal labs once proud of their equity missions were restructured. Budgets reassigned, DEI engineers reassigned or let go, no statements, just silence. A former research lead at a top 5 tech firm, speaking under condition of anonymity, described it bluntly: "We were told to pivot to neutral innovation." That meant, don't ask who the tech serves, just build it. But innovation is never neutral. And silence in science isn't absence, it's suppression. By 2019, the LGBTQ+ Science Policy Initiative documented a 28% decline in published peer-reviewed studies related to queer health and tech, despite an increase in overall health tech publications. The discrepancy wasn't random, It was a signal. A message that some ideas were now considered political, and that those who pursued them would do so at the margins, outside the spotlight, outside the funding cycles, and outside the very institutions once built to protect academic freedom. One former NIH data scientist summarized it like this: "It wasn't about bathrooms or pronouns, it was about whose questions got funded, whose problems got studied, and who got to be considered objective." And for a growing number of queer scientists, the choice became stark. For years there were whispers, researchers dropping out, proposals going quiet, mentors warning students off controversial topics, but it wasn't until 2021 that anyone put it all together, into numbers. And once the numbers were in, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Between 2016 and 2020, LGBTQ relevant medical research in the United States shrank by 37%. Not in quality, not in citations, just in quantity. Fewer papers, fewer projects, fewer voices. In the same period, overall federal medical research output increased by nearly 10%. It wasn't a recession, it was a redirection. At the National Institutes of Health, internal funding reports showed a gradual shift. Proposals once aimed at LGBTQ health, gender-based disparities, or queer youth services were suddenly being routed to non-politicized categories: chronic illness, generalized mental health, regional disparities. In funding language, that's called reframing. In human terms, that's called disappearance. A 2022 meta-analysis of PubMed entries showed a sharp drop in the appearance of keywords like LGBT, gender identity, and sexual orientation in published US-based medical research. After a slow upward climb across the Obama years, 2017 marked the beginning of a clear, quantifiable dip. It wasn't just the federal agencies. University data showed DEI programs in STEM saw widespread budget freezes and hiring holds. From Georgia to Missouri to Alaska, campus after campus paused initiatives, citing uncertainty around federal policy. One state school removed its LGBTQ science mentorship program entirely from its website. The archived version lives only on the Wayback Machine. And yet, few people outside those circles even noticed, because the Trump administration didn't just delete data, it changed the frame. It redrew the boundaries around what counted as science, what counted as neutral, what counted as real. And once the frame changed, so did the funding, the language, the questions themselves. This was never just about statistics, it was about the power to decide which problems were worth solving, and which identities were too divisive to include in the future of knowledge. By late 2019, the silence was starting to crack. Whistleblowers from inside federal health agencies began stepping forward. Leaked memos revealed intentional removals of LGBTQ-related survey questions. Scientists who'd once been afraid began filing formal complaints. Lawsuits were launched by civil rights groups, demanding the reinstatement of stripped data fields. At the University of California, a coalition of queer health researchers published a blistering paper titled "Erased by Design." It named names, outlined policy changes, tracked vanishing survey lines point by point. The movement spread. Science Twitter lit up with threads from LGBTQ researchers sharing their stories. Online coalitions emerged, Slack groups, Zoom calls, virtual summits. They called it the data reclamation movement. And for a brief moment it felt like the tide was turning. In early 2020, following legal pressure, the Department of Health and Human Services agreed to restore sexual orientation and gender identity questions to select national surveys. A narrow but symbolic victory. And then, the virus came. As COVID-19 tore through cities and communities, it exposed every fault line in American public health. Disparities in race, income, housing, and access exploded into the open. LGBTQ scientists sounded the alarm. Queer populations, especially Black and Latinx trans people, were at elevated risk. Higher rates of homelessness, chronic illness, lack of insurance, all the markers of vulnerability. There was just one problem. The US had no national data on how the virus was affecting LGBTQ people, because it had never been collected. COVID dashboards listed race, age, comorbidities, but not identity. SOGI data, or sexual orientation and gender identity, was almost entirely absent from national COVID tracking. No baseline, no categories, no lines in the database. Activists pleaded for inclusion. In May 2020, over 100 health organizations signed an open letter demanding that SAO-GI fields be added to testing and vaccination forms. The response was slow, patchy, politicized. By the end of that year, only a handful of states had voluntarily begun tracking LGBTQ COVID outcomes. And the results were devastating. Where data did exist, it showed disproportionate infection, hospitalization, and mortality rates. But in most states, there was simply nothing. No counts, no visibility, no proof. And so once again, in the middle of a global scientific emergency, a community was rendered invisible, not because it didn't exist, but because the system had never made space to see it. It didn't happen all at once. No headlines marked the exodus. No front-page stories mourned the students who switched majors, or the scientists who left their fields, or the research that was never written. But by 2024, the consequences had become undeniable. Across the US, LGBTQ scientists, some of the brightest minds in bioengineering, data ethics, AI health modeling, had quietly walked away, left academia, left public research. Some left the country altogether, finding homes in nations where inclusion wasn't controversial, but fundamental to innovation. The numbers paint the picture. From 2017 to 2023, self-reported LGBTQ participation in U.S. STEM PhD programs dropped by nearly 18%. Postdoc retention rates fell even further. Entire research labs dissolved after funding collapsed. In interviews, the reasons were always the same. Unidentified person 1, VO, no future here. Unidentified person 2, VO, not safe. Unidentified person 3, VO, I got tired of being erased. And it wasn't just academia. In the private sector, tech giants pulled back from LGBTQ-focused research and development. Medical startups that once pitched queer-centered wearable tech or identity-informed AI diagnostics found themselves quietly defunded or redirected toward neutral markets. One health tech founder described the shift bluntly: health tech founder, VO. You could build a glucose monitor, but not a binder-safe fitness tracker. You could design for general wellness, but not transition-related care, so the projects died. Not because they didn't work, but because they didn't fit the frame. And in high schools across the country, a new silence took root. LGBTQ students, the future of science, watched the world's response, saw their identities debated on television, watched programs defunded, role models leave, fields shrink. They got the message, and many never entered the lab at all. This wasn't just a brain drain, it was a drain of trust, of belonging, of belief in a system that promised to reward merit but punished identity. America didn't just lose researchers, it lost the science they would have created, the grants never written, the experiments never run, the breakthroughs that might have come, but now never will. Because progress isn't just about invention, it's about inclusion. And science doesn't move forward unless everyone moves with it. They didn't all disappear. Some stayed and fought, others pivoted, and some, like Dr. Alex Chang, left the system entirely. Dr. Chang had spent a decade building a groundbreaking predictive model for HIV care outcomes in queer youth. By 2020, their work had been cited in over 40 papers and rejected by 3 separate NIH funding panels. The last rejection came with a note topic considered culturally divisive, so they left. Now Dr. Chang leads a private R&D team in Toronto, designing AI diagnostic tools tailored to LGBTQ populations across Canada and the EU. Their work is being fast-tracked into national public health systems. They told us this. Dr. Alex Chang, VO. I didn't quit science, I just stopped trying to do it in a place that didn't want me. And they weren't alone. Thousands of hours of research, hundreds of early career scientists, entire fields of inquiry, cut short, redirected, lost. Did Trump set back LGBTQ science in the US? The numbers say yes. But the real tragedy? We'll never know what discoveries we missed. We'll never read the papers that were never published. Never feel the impact of the medical devices that were never funded. Never benefit from the insights those erased voices might have brought. Because silence doesn't just erase people, it erases futures. If you believe data shouldn't discriminate, hit like, share this video, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Because the next generation of scientists might be watching. And they're deciding right now whether to stay, to speak, or to disappear. So let them know they matter. Their work matters, their science matters. And if you want more stories the history books leave behind, subscribe, and we'll keep uncovering them, together.